A single tilt of a steaming tray. A quiet burn that ignited an invisible war at 38,000 feet. Who was the man in seat 2A, calmly pressing ice to his blistered skin, while the world around him looks the other way? Meet Silas Mercer, a black CEO traveling incognito to expose the cracks in a luxury airline's golden facade. What happens when an everyday act of negligence becomes the spark for a full-blown corporate reckoning? Can compassion and integrity really uproot years of silence, cover-ups, and unchecked bias in a cabin of polished smiles and muted apologies? One man's stillness becomes a weapon. One empty seat reserved forever for accountability. Get ready to soar into a story of dignity, daring, and the power of a single act to bring down an empire built on indifference. If you believe respect belongs at every altitude, hit like, share this video, and subscribe now, because silence is their shield, and your voice is the breakthrough. The heat came before the pain. Not loud, not violent, just sudden. A slight metallic shift, a faint clatter, and then a stream of scalding liquid spilled out like an invisible whip across Silas Mercer's forearm. It wasn't dramatic, not at first glance. The metal tray hadn't flipped. It had tilted. Subtly. Intentionally, the contents boiling broth, mushy vegetables rushed downward in a perfect arc. They landed squarely on his exposed skin, seeping through the cuff of his white shirt. He inhaled through his teeth. The pain lit his nerves like electricity, sharp and fast, but he didn't flinch. His right hand twitched under the linen napkin on his lap. His jaw clenched. He said nothing. The man standing beside him, a broad-shouldered flight supervisor in a pressed Aureus Air uniform, glanced down at the mess. Then back at Silas. There was no urgency in his movement, no apology in his face. "Hot trays," he muttered. Then, almost as an afterthought, "You all right?" His voice carried no genuine concern. The tone was dry, dismissive, mechanical. Silas turned his head slowly, studying the man's name tag, Ronan Pike. The name sounded too stiff for how casually the man now shrugged. He made no move to clean it, no request for aid, just stood there, tray still in hand, eyes cold and impassive. First class had fallen into an awkward silence. A woman in seat 1C lowered her phone and looked away. A man across the aisle narrowed his eyes. The teenager by the window gasped quietly, but said nothing. Even the baby in 2D stopped fussing, and Silas, burning, blistering, silent, finally spoke. "That tray was nearly boiling," he said softly. Ronan lifted a brow. "It's airline food," he replied. "Comes hot. That's the whole point." Then, with a pointed glance at Silas's arm, he added, "Next time, maybe keep your elbows inside the lines." It wasn't just dismissive, it was condescending. The silence grew louder. Silas's sleeve clung to his skin, soaked in broth. The fabric was blistering against the heat, and his skin beneath it had begun to pucker. The pain pulsed. Still, he didn't break, because this wasn't just discomfort, it was data. Observe, record, do not interfere. That had been the directive. 2 rows back, a quiet man in a gray jacket shifted slightly in his seat. His left hand tapped once against the armrest. Another, further behind, adjusted his glasses and checked his phone, screen dim but recording. Neither moved, obviously. Neither looked at Silas directly. But they were watching. They were there for him. Silas Mercer was not a random traveler, not a nervous businessman, not a wealthy elite. He was the lead operations auditor for Horizon Equity Partners, the silent majority owner of Aureus Air and a dozen other luxury brands. His presence here was classified. No cameras, no announcement, no digital trail. He had boarded under a different name, a scrubbed ID, a generic profile. Only 2 people on this flight knew who he truly was, and both were part of his embedded task force. He was here for a reason. In recent months, Horizon had received escalating reports, allegations of racism, negligent safety practices, a culture of intimidation beneath the champagne veneer of Aureus First Class. And so Silas had agreed to fly quietly, to see it, feel it. He hadn't expected it to happen to him. The pain hadn't lessened. If anything, it grew sharper as the seconds passed. Still no apology, still no action. Ronan Pike had already turned his back and begun pushing the cart toward the galley. His voice floated down the aisle, light and unaffected. "Let's keep it moving," he said to another crew member. "Service waits for no one." Behind him, a young attendant lingered near Silas's seat, early 20s, maybe, nervous hands. He held a towel, a small first aid kit tucked into the crook of his arm. "Sir," he said, voice shaking. "Do you want a compress or maybe jewels?" Ronan barked from mid-cabin, eyes forward. "Section 5 is behind schedule." The boy froze. He looked from Ronan to Silas, then down at the towel in his hand. He hesitated, then turned, and walked away. Silas sat back, letting the moment settle. His breathing slowed, his body remained still, but his mind sharp, trained, relentless was already moving. This wasn't just an oversight. This was a symptom. The tray, the scalding, the refusal to acknowledge, the subtle blame shift, the enforced silence. It was all familiar, not new, just unmasked. A man across the aisle leaned slightly toward Silas. "You good," he whispered, quietly enough not to attract attention. Silas nodded once. "I'm fine." He wasn't, but that wasn't the point. From behind his smartwatch, he tapped twice. That was the signal. In row 4C, Mara Elgin adjusted the scarf around her neck and began syncing the cabin's Wi-Fi logs. Nico Tremaine. Closer to coach, opened a secure app and began timestamping passenger phone activity. The data team was online. Silas turned to the window. Outside, the clouds were soft, indifferent. The light of late morning glazed the engine in gold. The plane glided forward, unaware of the storm forming inside. He adjusted the cloth napkin gently against his arm. The pain pulsed, steady now, rhythmic, but Silas welcomed it. Because now, the story wasn't hearsay. It wasn't anonymous. It was happening to him, and that meant something was about to change. The cabin remained still. Not the usual kind of stillness that settles after meal service. This was different, heavier, thicker, like a room waiting for someone else to react, but no one did. Silas Mercer leaned gently into the armrest, careful not to let the soaked fabric of his sleeve rub too hard against the raw skin beneath. The heat had become a steady throb now, a warning pulse echoing up through his elbow, reminding him that something had just crossed a line. And yet, everyone stayed in their seats. The woman in 1C pulled out her noise-canceling headphones. The man across the aisle flicked open a finance magazine. The teenager by the window resumed his game, though his eyes kept darting toward Silas's arm. No one asked a second time if he was okay. Not even Jules, the younger attendant, who hadn't returned. He could still hear Ronan Pike's voice further up the aisle, light-hearted now, joking with another crew member near the galley. Laughter, ice clinking into glasses, the kind of normalcy people cling to when pretending nothing just happened. Silas stared at the tray table in front of him. Bits of soggy carrot clung to the cloth napkin. His fork had slid slightly off its plate, now resting awkwardly against the corner. The food tray was gone, but the mess remained, and the silence. Not a single member of the cabin crew had come back to address the incident. Not one. He glanced down at the napkin pressed to his forearm. The cloth was damp, but not cold. Useless. The burn beneath was likely second degree at least. He knew enough from prior cases to recognize the swelling, the texture of skin just before it begins to blister. He could have called out. He could have demanded help. He didn't, because every second they failed to act was another piece of evidence. The mission wasn't just about behavior. It was about culture, negligence, gaslighting, passive cruelty. These weren't one-off mistakes. They were signs, patterns, especially when everyone else played along or looked away. He scanned the row ahead. A man in 1B adjusted his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. His leg bounced slightly beneath his seat. Nervous energy. Across from him. 1D flipped through an in-flight catalog, jewelry, luggage, a 5-page spread on Aureus luxury at altitude. Her lips pursed as if nothing had happened. No one moved, because they all saw what happened, and they all made a choice. Do nothing. It was easier, safer, cleaner, especially in first class. Silas exhaled slowly through his nose. He shifted his weight carefully, suppressing a wince as the fabric tugged against his skin. The damp sleeve pressed tighter now as the swelling grew beneath it. A blister had begun to form. He could feel the skin pulling, but he made no sound. Instead, he let his gaze wander toward the cabin curtain. The galley beyond it was partially visible polished countertops, rows of stacked cups, the dull hum of service prep. Ronan stood half-turned, speaking to a tall woman in an apron. He gestured casually toward the back of the cabin, laughing. Not once did he look toward Silas. No follow-up, no report, no standard injury procedure, just move on. Silas felt something stir deep in his chest. Not anger, clarity. He reached for the seat controls and slowly reclined. Just a few degrees, enough to take pressure off his elbow. The movement felt clinical, robotic, but in his mind, pieces were aligning. He knew what this was. He'd seen it before. Not always with burns or boiling trays. Sometimes it came as a misplaced upgrade, a double-booked seat, a condescending tone, an accidental comment, and every time the victim was asked if they were sure, if they had misunderstood, if maybe they were too sensitive. He remembered a case 6 months ago. A woman in her 60s, also black, had filed a complaint about a first-class attendant ignoring her repeated request for water. She was told the staff had prioritized elderly passengers. She was elderly. The report was buried. The employee promoted. The woman never flew Aureus again. Now. Silas understood why. This wasn't a broken link in the chain. This was the chain, and every link knew how to stay silent. He glanced once more toward the economy curtain. It shifted slightly, 2 rows behind him. Mara Elgin tapped gently on her phone. She had swapped out her glasses for reading ones, non-prescription, but good for hiding micro cameras. She didn't look toward him, didn't need to. She had caught it all. Nico Tremaine, further back, was already plugged into the cabin Wi-Fi. his laptop disguised as a travel tablet, an encrypted upload in progress. Silas didn't give orders. He didn't need to. They had seen enough. He reached again for the napkin, folded it twice, and placed it calmly over his wrist. Then he lifted his glass of water, untouched since before the spill, and took a single sip. The pain was still there, alive, insistent. But so was the purpose. He watched the ice swirl slowly in his glass. Then the voice returned. "Ronan, dessert service coming down the line. Let's smile, people. Show them why they pay extra." It came with a chuckle, arrogant, self-assured, like nothing had gone wrong. Like no one had just been burned. Silas didn't turn. Instead, he closed his eyes for a moment and sank into the quiet hum of the engine. He let the cabin around him blur into soft focus, the leather of the headrest behind him, the muted gold accents, the artificial calm of premium air travel, and, under it all, the rot. He remembered something his grandmother once said. "It's not the wolves in the woods that break you. It's the wolves in silk." The plane trembled slightly with turbulence, a small bump, almost symbolic. Silas opened his eyes and adjusted his seatbelt slightly, tightened it, secured it. The calm had passed. The next move would come soon. He just had to wait. And so he did, burning, watching, measuring, because sometimes justice doesn't come loud. Sometimes it waits in silence, collecting proof, and when it speaks, it doesn't scream. It simply ends careers. From the outside, they looked like ordinary passengers. One wore a tan blazer and simple jeans, knees crossed with a book resting on his lap. He hadn't turned a page in the last 20 minutes. The other wore a navy cardigan, a soft scarf draped around her neck, dark curls tucked neatly into a travel bun. She tapped her phone occasionally but never glanced at it for long. To the untrained eye, they were harmless, invisible, but to Silas Mercer, they were the most present people on this aircraft. Mara Elgin and Nico Tremaine had worked alongside him for 5 years, embedded in some of the most fragile corporate environments in the country. They weren't bodyguards in the traditional sense. They didn't wear earpieces or sit with folded arms in intimidating suits. Their weapons were sharper: observation, documentation, disruption through exposure. While Ronan Pike joked in the galley, Mara was already compiling a soft folder of notes, cross-referencing timestamps with cabin activity. Every word Ronan had spoken since the moment of the spill had been flagged. Every passenger's face who had turned away was noted. Each angle from the cabin's built-in security cams had been marked for retrieval. Nico, seated further back in 4D, had bypassed the onboard firewall. He had direct access to the server cache. He could see who accessed the entertainment systems, which phones connected to Wi-Fi, what videos were uploaded, and which were deleted. More importantly, he was tracking Ronan. The flight attendant had a digital trail longer than most flight routes. Nico pulled up his internal ID profile through a backdoor access channel tied to Horizon Equity's secure audit platform. Ronan Pike had been with Aureus Air for 17 years. No promotions in the last 6, no demotions either. But buried in the archive were whispers. 3 flagged customer service complaints, 2 unverified incident reports, all closed without escalation. 1 internal conflict resolution file marked confidential, never reviewed by HR. That was where Mara focused, because what couldn't be proven on paper often screamed loudest in patterns. She tapped gently on her phone, her fingertips dancing across the screen in precise rhythms. She wasn't just logging events, she was forming a narrative, one that could be backed by verified data, live imagery, and behavioral markers. Silas knew what that meant. They were building the case in real time. He took a slow breath, steadying himself as a wave of heat surged up from his wrist. The cloth napkin offered little relief now. His shirt clung to his skin, stiff where the broth had dried, sticky where the burn continued to weep beneath. He could have asked for ice, could have demanded first aid. But the moment he did, the power shifted. The narrative changed. It became about his request rather than their inaction. So he waited, silently, deliberately, letting their silence hang them. A gentle tap on his shoulder broke his focus. He turned. It was the woman from 1C, early 40s, pearl earrings, tan leather handbag tucked neatly beside her feet. "I saw what happened," she said, voice low. "Do you want me to say something? I wasn't sure." Silas studied her for a moment. Her eyes darted toward the galley, then back to him. Wary, worried, but not malicious. He shook his head once, not out of dismissal, but caution. "I appreciate it," he said softly, "but I've got what I need." She hesitated, then nodded. She stopped herself. "You handled that with grace." He gave her a small, tired smile. It didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you." She returned to her seat and pulled her blanket up over her lap, shoulders drawn tight. People often don't know which moment is the one that defines them, until after. Silas had lived through enough crises to understand that most people aren't cruel. They're just scared of being wrong, of standing out, of making things worse. So they say nothing, even when the world is on fire in the row beside them. Mara tapped once on her screen. A new alert. Someone had uploaded a video to social media from row 5A. The file was already gone, likely deleted seconds after posting. But the metadata remained. She flagged the passenger ID. Nico picked it up from there. The clip showed a blurry but damning angle Ronan tilting the tray. The slow pour of broth, the lack of reaction, the smirk, no stumble, no apology, just cold calculation. Silas hadn't even seen that footage himself. But now, it was archived in Horizon's secured vault, irrefutable, unaltered, live testimony. He leaned back in his seat, staring at the faint speck of sky visible through the window. The clouds had thinned. Blue had begun to peek through. Below, the land looked endless, tiny, distant, the paradox of air travel. Soaring through space while utterly confined, trapped in civility. He turned his attention back to the seat pocket in front of him. Folded safety cards, a glossy Aureus Air magazine, an ad for a signature wine exclusive to first-class guests. He pulled the magazine out slowly. Page after page of curated luxury. Smiling models, gold accents, passengers clinking glasses in designer clothing. Nowhere in the spreads did he see someone who looked like him. Not as a passenger, only as service staff. The realization stung more than the burn. Aureus had branded itself on elegance, on premium service and exclusivity. But Silas knew what that often meant. Selective dignity, conditional respect. He closed the magazine quietly and slid it back into the pocket. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the aircraft began its descent sequence. A soft chime played overhead. A female voice filled the space. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing at Belmont Gateway Airport in approximately 35 minutes. Please ensure your seat backs and tray tables are in the upright position." Silas remained still. His tray table hadn't moved since the burn. The stain on the napkin still darkened the edge. His glass was still half full. The food, long cleared, had left a faint odor of scorched vegetables lingering in the air. Ronan hadn't come back. Jules hadn't returned. No compress, no medical report, no apology, just a slow march toward the ground. As the plane began its approach, Silas gently tapped his smartwatch once. Mara received the signal immediately. She packed her phone into a slim leather folio. Her notes synced to the cloud. Nico shut his laptop. The upload was complete. The data had spoken. Silas straightened his cuff. Pain flared again, but he masked it beneath a steady breath. He wasn't walking off this plane as a victim. He was walking off as a witness, one with everything he needed. Not hearsay, not speculation, evidence, and it had come from the best source of all, their silence. Silas Mercer didn't check a bag, not because he was avoiding attention, but because a man like him didn't need reminders of permanence. He traveled light, always had, even before the titles, even before the money. It was part instinct, part strategy. The flight was descending now. Belmont Gateway shimmered somewhere below the cloud line, a blur of motion and asphalt preparing to receive another faceless stream of arrivals. To everyone on board, Silas was just another face. Black man, alone, quiet, wrist burned, dressed too well to be a tourist, too composed to be rattled. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't record a viral clip. But what no one saw was the file quietly compiling itself in the cloud above them. His name didn't appear on the manifest as Silas Mercer. Instead, it read, Evan Ridley, Seat 2A, no special dietary requirements, platinum tier, paper trail clean, but the real Silas, the one behind the name. The one who hadn't said a word about the burn was a corporate ghost. He didn't work in one building. He didn't report to one CEO. He reported to 5. Horizon Equity Partners had tapped him 5 years ago to do what legal teams and HR departments couldn't. Find the rot before it stank. He didn't lead with threats. He didn't crash into boardrooms or go live on LinkedIn. He listened, watched. Let the arrogance of those in power do the heavy lifting. He was sent into spaces like this one to understand what couldn't be put in spreadsheets. The tension that lives in galleys, the silence between wrongdoings, the way first-class crew tilt their heads when they talk to certain passengers and look over others like ghosts. Silas had walked into tech firms, fashion houses, and oil companies, but something about Aureus Air had stayed in his gut for months. From the outside, it was sleek, aspirational, featured in magazines beside 5-star hotels and elite concierge services. Their branding used language like global elegance and the future of belonging. But the reports had told a different story. Too many to ignore. Passengers downgraded mid-flight, crew joking about customers in private Slack threads, quiet policies encouraging the selection of aesthetically aspirational clientele when choosing seat upgrades. And then there were the stories like his. A scalding accident last year involving a young boy with Down syndrome. The tray tipped, no apology, no compensation. His mother's complaint was redirected, then buried. That case had been the final spark, and Horizon had sent Silas in. He hadn't planned to be the test subject, but sometimes the truth finds its own window. As the seatbelt light chimed, Silas reached slowly beneath his seat and retrieved his briefcase. Inside it, a folded document, nondescript. ivory paper, Navy SEAL, no logo, just one name at the bottom. Jonah Lind, Chief Counsel, Horizon Equity Partners, and a sentence. Your findings are binding. Your word is final. He had read that line 20 times. Now it pulsed behind his eyes as the landing gear lowered and the aircraft began its final descent. No panic, no nerves, but something inside him shifted. This wasn't just about firing Ronan Pike. It was about what allowed Ronan to thrive. Silas had seen men like him before, competent enough to keep, cold enough to please management, smart enough to hurt without fingerprints. It was never about the tray. It was about the eyes that didn't blink when hot broth soaked through someone's skin, the smirk, the deflection, the unspoken message. You don't belong here. Silas hadn't flinched. Not then, not now. As the plane made contact with the tarmac, a light jolt ran through the cabin. Passengers stirred. Overhead, bins clicked into attention. Jules reappeared briefly with a plastic smile, reminding people to remain seated. He didn't look at Silas. Didn't dare. Silas watched him move like a shadow between seats. There was kindness in that boy. But fear, too. Fear is how cultures like Aureus survive. Fear is how injustice is enforced. Not through threats, through silence. As the plane taxied toward the gate, Silas adjusted his cuff one final time. Beneath it, the burn throbbed, pink and raw. A welt had formed along the edge of his forearm. Ugly. Honest. He would not cover it up. Some wounds weren't meant to be hidden. The chime rang again. Doors preparing to open. Mara Elgin stood 2 rows behind. Lifting her carry-on with practiced ease, her eyes met Silas's only once, the briefest nod. Nico Tremaine had already disappeared into the flow of passengers, fast, silent. Data uploaded to 3 separate encrypted drives. The footage would be reviewed by analysts within the hour. Silas didn't move yet. Let the crowd shuffle first. Let the noise rise. When he finally stood, it was with no hurry. He collected his briefcase, adjusted the strap across his shoulder, and stepped into the aisle. Ronan Pike was at the front, chatting with the gate agent, smiling, charming. He turned halfway, eyes sweeping lazily down the line of disembarking guests. Then his gaze landed on Silas, and for the first time, it faltered. A flicker of something passed through it. Recognition, doubt, fear. It vanished as fast as it came. Silas walked past him without a word. But as he crossed the threshold into Belmont Gateway, the terminal lights bright and sharp ahead, he felt the moment solidify inside him. They had no idea who he was, but they would. Silas Mercer stepped off the jet bridge into the bright bustle of Belmont Gateway Airport, the noise and motion of arrivals and departures swirling around him. Overhead, screens announced flights, gate changes, and baggage claims. The buzz was relentless like life, always moving forward, never pausing for anyone's pain. He paused, letting the tide of passengers flow past, then turned toward a discreet exit. Mara Elgin and Nico Tremaine fell in beside him, their expressions calm but intense. No words were exchanged. There was no need. They had the evidence they needed. Outside the terminal, black SUVs idled at the curb. Horizon Equity's logo was discreet on their license plates. An assistant handed Silas a black folder. Inside were printouts, video stills from the spill, time-stamped transcripts of Ronan Pike's remarks, passenger statements, server logs showing deleted uploads, and the internal complaint file fragments Nico had recovered. Silas thumbed through each page slowly. The burn on his arm throbbed as if reading the documents made it worse. Evidence was heavy. In a way, pain alone was not. He closed the folder, slipping it into his briefcase. "Let's go," he said quietly. The convoy pulled away from the curb into traffic, leaving Belmont's chaos behind. Inside the vehicle's tinted windows, Silas reclined, closing his eyes. He could feel every bump, every rumble under the tires. The pain pulsed again beneath the napkin he still wore. It reminded him of why he was here. At Horizon's Midtown offices, the security detail checked them in. Jonah Lind was waiting in a conference room with two other executives. They rose as Silas entered, the gravity of his presence folding the air. None spoke until he set the briefcase on the table and opened it. Jonah picked up the top document video still of the tray tilt. He studied it, tension in his jaw. "This is quite direct," he said. Then he looked up at Silas. "You ready to proceed?" Silas nodded. They didn't hide it. They just assumed no one would care. Silence settled as Jonah stood, addressing the room. "We move immediately. Legal, PR, operations, all eyes on Aureus Air. No half measures." Silas exhaled and closed his eyes briefly. "I want a full internal audit. Every crew roster, every complaint for the last 5 years. I want crew logs, call button records, everything." Jonah managed a tight smile. "Consider it done." Silas stood and headed for the door. In the hallway, Mara's whisper broke the hush. "You all right?" He looked at her, meeting her steady gaze. "I will be." They walked on. Silas knew the next flight he took would not be under an alias. When you expose a problem that big, you walk right back into the room where it happened. Silas Mercer sat in the meeting room at Horizon Equity Partners headquarters, but his mind was still flying. He had laid out the evidence. He had issued the directives, and yet he knew the real battle would not be won behind a desk. It would be won in the spaces where humans act or fail to act. That evening, he flew back on an Aureus Air jet. The crew greeted him with polite smiles. He nodded once in return. He wore a clean white shirt and a pressed navy jacket over the burn on his arm. He would not hide it. Let them see every blister and every line. Jules Rayner came down the aisle with the beverage cart. His eyes flickered to Silas's arm. He did not stop. He nearly collided with a passenger who rapped on his phone screen as if daring it to display better service. Silas watched Jules for a moment. The boy tried to adjust his cap, then looked away. He had done the right thing once. Silas could see it in his face. But fear still held him back. Only a nudge would set him free. Ronan Pike stood at the front, reviewing his tablet. He did not glance toward Jules. He did not glance toward Silas. He reminded himself to smile at the passengers. No one had taught him how to apologize. Silas leaned forward. He spoke softly but firmly so only Jules could hear. "If you see me standing here, waiting for help, think twice before you walk away." Jules froze. His shoulders tightened. He stared at Silas with wide eyes. A passenger in 3B lowered his newspaper. He had been silent so far, but now he chewed his lower lip as if unable to swallow the wrong entirely. The young attendant swallowed hard. Then he spoke quietly. "Sir, I'm sorry. Let me get you ice." Ronan looked up. His smile faltered. He stepped forward. "Jules, come back here." Jules hesitated. Then he looked at Silas. Silas met his gaze and nodded once. It was enough. Jules turned on his heel and hurried to a storage compartment. Silas watched him reach for the packet of wrapped ice packs. He tore the plastic carefully. He approached Silas like he might approach a shy animal. He held out a cold pack on trembling fingers. Silas accepted it with one hand. His other hand rested lightly on the armrest. In the reflected overhead light, he saw Jules's uncertain expression. He placed the ice on the burn and pressed lightly. The cool hit him like a relief. "Thank you," Silas said. His voice was steady. Jules exhaled. He set the other pack aside, then turned toward Ronan at the front. He needed help, he said with more strength than he expected. "You didn't offer anything except a shrug." Ronan's jaw tightened. He clenched the tablet in one hand. His voice was low, but everyone in first class heard. "You think you know better than I do. I take care of my crew's orders, if I have time." Silas felt the tension sharpen. He looked at Ronan while Jules stood between them, an unlikely witness to a growing confrontation. Another passenger reached into his pocket. He tapped something into a small device. It glowed briefly. Then the red dot appeared on his phone. He was recording. Silas leaned back in his seat and folded his hands on his lap. He said nothing. He just watched. Ronan stared at Jules. He opened his mouth. Jules braced himself. He lifted his chin and said clearly for every passenger within earshot, "He is paying for first class. He deserves care." The cabin fell silent again. Even the engines seemed to hush. The tension had become visible. Ronan swallowed. His face reddened. He looked at Silas, swallowed again. Then he said, "I'll get a towel," and he retreated toward the galley without another word. Jules stood frozen for a moment longer. Then he stepped back to Silas's side. He offered a slight bow of his head and hurried away. Silas pressed the ice against his arm. He inhaled through his nose. The pain still pulsed, but it was more bearable now. He looked at the fellow passenger who had recorded. He nodded once in gratitude. The passenger lowered the phone. He gave a small thumbs up. His face was solemn but proud. Silas realized the cabin had shifted. That quiet moment of defiance had undone something invisible. The illusion that no one cared had cracked. Every passenger who had looked away now looked back. Some stared at Jewel. Some stared at Ronan. Some stared at Silas himself. They all wondered what would come next. He settled back as Ronan returned with a stack of towels. Jules had already placed cold water and antiseptic wipes on the service tray. Someone had placed a proper medical kit next to the towels without asking. Salisa pressed a towel to his arm. It was no longer a napkin. It was care. It was service. It was acknowledgement. It was respect. Silas closed his eyes for a moment and felt the shift under his skin. It was quiet, but it was there. He opened his eyes and looked at Ronan Pike. The man avoided his gaze now. He focused on the cabin walls. Silas spoke softly, but the cabin heard. "Thank you." Ronan exhaled sharply. "Sir, this will not happen again." His tone was less arrogance and more fear. Silas lifted his Coke Zero and took a calm sip. The ice clinked in the glass. Sound broke the heaviness. Conversation crept back in. A woman asked for a new pillow. The teenager returned to his game. But all of it felt different, lighter, human. Silas's gaze drifted to Jules, who was helping another passenger select a movie. His shoulders had straightened. His back was no longer rounded. He had stood up to someone in power. He had chosen justice. And Silas knew the mission was changing too. It was no longer about collecting evidence in the shadows. It was about empowering others to step forward. He tapped his smartwatch twice. Mara received the signal. Nico began uploading a new file tagged Flight 327 Turning Point. Silas leaned his head back against the seat and closed his eyes. He stopped feeling the pulse of the pain. Instead, he felt the pulse of possibility. The rest of the flight passed without incident. The crew offered a decent meal. Ronan checked in at regular intervals. He did not smirk once. He offered genuine apologies each time. He did not ask for forgiveness. He simply did what was right. Silas ignored the polite platitudes. He knew actions mattered more than words. When the plane touched down at Wexley International for the return leg, Silas gathered his briefcase. He stood and looked around the cabin. He saw Jules's proud smile. He saw the recorded video on the passenger's phone replaying silently. He saw Ronan Pike tightening his uniform sleeves as if preparing for a new fight. Silas climbed out into the aisle. He tapped the young attendant on the shoulder. "You did well," he said. "No hidden meaning, just truth." Jules nodded and exhaled as if relief had become part of his lungs. Silas walked past Ronan. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. There was no hatred there, just understanding that Saturday night flight would never be the same again. Silas Mercer watched the runway lights blur beneath the wing as Aureus Air Flight 327 descended toward Wexley International Airport. The engine hum was constant, but the cabin felt electric. Sometimes turbulence is invisible. This was one of those times. The seatbelt light chimed off and passengers began to unbuckle. Silas did not move immediately. He let the moment stretch. Around him, the crew prepared for arrival. He had seen them act differently tonight. Genuine care had replaced practiced indifference. Even Ronan Pike had changed his tone, not completely, but enough to be noticeable. The jet touched down smoothly. A soft shudder ran through the fuselage, a gentle announcement that the flight was complete. Ronan made his way down the aisle, saying, "Please watch your step." His voice was steady but lacked its usual confidence. He offered a final apology to Silas and departed through the galley curtain to arrange ground support. Silas stood and collected his carry-on. He felt the weight of his briefcase against his side. Inside, it was everything. Evidence enough to change an airline, enough to rebuild it from the inside out, enough to warn a culture that neglect and prejudice would no longer go unchallenged. He slipped into the aisle and looked at the faces around him. Some smiled at him as they passed. Others avoided his gaze. He saw Jules Rayner at the front handing out custom apology letters signed by the Aureus Air operations director. A small gesture, but a meaningful one. A sign that the company was listening for once rather than just acting. Silas stepped onto the jet bridge. The doors closed behind him with a soft hiss. He walked into the terminal and immediately noticed a cluster of black SUVs waiting at the curb. Horizon Equity vehicles. He moved toward them and was met by Jonah Lind, flanked by two attorneys. Jonah offered a curt nod and led him to a private shuttle. Inside the SUV, the leather seats were cool. Silas sank in and exhaled. He closed his eyes and let his mind rewind the moments on board. He felt the burn in his arm again. It had been numbed by ice and care, but it was still there. A reminder that some wounds leave lasting impressions, more lasting than any PR statement. Jonah looked at him through the rearview mirror. "We've suspended Ronan Pike pending a full investigation," he said. "Medical is handling your burn. You will have a formal statement tomorrow. Media is already filled with speculation." Silas nodded. "I want a controlled release," he said. "No leaks, no sensationalism, just the facts." Jonah raised an eyebrow. "That may be tough." Silas smiled faintly. "I'm not here for show. I'm here for change." The SUV merged into traffic. Silas watched the city pass through tinted windows. Streetlights flickered on as dusk approached. He felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He was no longer a silent observer. He was an active agent of accountability. At Horizon Equity headquarters, Jonathan led him to the executive floor where a small team waited: PR specialists, legal counsel, operations managers. Each person wore a mask of professionalism. But Silas knew masks better than most. He saw the tension behind their eyes. At stake was more than one man's career. It was the reputation of a brand. He set his briefcase on the conference table and opened it. He spread out the documents. They included the boarding manifest showing his alias. It included the medical report confirming a second-degree burn. It included passenger witness statements. It included server logs demonstrating interference with passenger recordings. It included Jules's signed letter of apology. And it included the internal complaint file fragments showing pattern after pattern of neglect toward black passengers. He paused to let them absorb the evidence. They shifted in their seats. A junior lawyer swallowed heavily. A PR executive tapped her pen against her notebook. No one spoke. Silas said gently, "This is the moment they either learn or they repeat their mistakes." Jonah cleared his throat. "We will announce an immediate audit of every flight crew roster and passenger complaint for the past 12 months. We will ground any staff with repeated allegations until further notice." Silas nodded. "And we will rename the airline." He pronounced it with calm conviction. Sarif Air. A collective intake of breath filled the room. He leaned forward and met each pair of eyes in turn. "We cannot keep the name Aureus. It carries too much baggage. We need a fresh start. Transparency from day one. A brand that means accountability rather than silence." The head of marketing swallowed. "Sarif Air. I like it. It suggests guardianship." Silas closed the briefcase. "Guardianship," he echoed. "That is what we owe every passenger, not just luxury but safety and respect. That is the promise we will make tomorrow." Outside the building, the evening sky had turned a deep indigo. The lights of Wexley shimmered through the glass. Silas walked to the window and placed his hand on the glass. He felt the city hum beneath him. He felt the burn in his arm again. It reminded him of who he was, not just a witness but a catalyst. He tapped his watch twice. Mara and Nico received the signal. A new file tag appeared in the secure audit system. Flight 327 decommissioning. The plan to transition from Aureus to Sarif was already in motion. Silas turned from the window and walked toward the exit. His steps were quiet but resolute. He had lit a flame on that flight. Now it was time to fan it into a movement. He passed Jonah in the corridor. Jonah nodded in solidarity. No words were needed. They were on the same side. Silas exited into the night. The SUV waited. He climbed inside and the doors closed. The world outside continued without pause. He closed his eyes, feeling the ache in his arm. It throbbed with purpose now rather than pain. A new chapter had begun. Silas Mercer entered the executive conference suite at Horizon Equity Partners with a quiet steadiness. The morning light filtered through soaring glass walls, revealing a panorama of the city below. It was a view that once symbolized opportunity. Now it reminded him of responsibility. A long, polished table waited. surrounded by faces both eager and anxious. Horizon Equity had convened its top leadership, legal counsel, public relations, compliance officers, and a handful of outside advisors. They gathered to dissect the fallout from Flight 327 and to chart the path forward. Silas placed his briefcase on the table and released a deep breath. He did not speak immediately. He allowed the hush to settle around him. They had all seen the documents. They had all read the reports. Yet in that charged silence lay the truth waiting to be voiced. Finally, he said, "Thank you for joining on short notice. We have a critical issue to resolve. Aureus Air is under scrutiny, and we cannot rely on old practices. It is time we demonstrate genuine accountability." He slid open the briefcase. Inside lay a stack of folders, each marked with a bold red label reading, "Review." The first was Flight 327. The second bore the date of a separate complaint filed by a passenger in February. The third exposed a report from August last year. They went on and on. Silas removed the first folder and handed it to the senior compliance officer. "This is the complete incident file for Flight 327, he said. "I want you to verify every statement and timestamp the crew's actions. I need a full report on protocol breaches by end of day." The compliance officer nodded. He opened the folder and began scanning with a furrowed brow. Silas turned to the room. "Next, I want every crew roster for the past 12 months. Include all names and assignments. I want HR to cross-reference these rosters with all customer complaints. Flag any pattern of repeated minor incidents that never rose to formal investigation." Heads dipped as assistants tapped on tablets and desktops. For some, this was business as usual. For others, it was a revelation. Silas pressed on. "Legal. You'll draft a formal notice to any staff member who fails to cooperate with this process. We will not tolerate obstruction. PR will prepare a transparent public statement that outlines our plan for a comprehensive review. We will not hide behind corporate jargon." The PR lead inhaled sharply. She had a document open already. "We can craft a statement that acknowledges shortcomings, outlines immediate steps, and reassures customers of our commitment to safety and respect. We will avoid platitudes." Silas nodded. "Good. Ensure the language is clear and direct. No more hiding behind phrases like valued guest. It must feel authentic." The room was electric. People exchanged glances as they realized Silas's vision demanded far more than spin. It demanded real change. Silas continued. "I also want our external auditors brought in. We will employ a third party to validate these findings. We cannot simply rely on internal confirmation. We will submit to rigorous independent scrutiny." An operations manager stirred. He glanced at his notes. "We will need to ground any flight crew under investigation until we have clarity on their conduct. This may impact schedules." Silas exhaled. "I understand the operational challenges, but safety and respect are not optional. We will manage the impact, offer ground staff and replacement cabins as needed." He paused and let the weight of that sink in. Changing a culture meant accepting short-term pain for long-term gain. A legal counsel cleared his throat. "We will need to notify the relevant aviation authorities. This may trigger an external review from the Department of Transportation." Silas met his gaze. "Let them come. We will lead the narrative. We will provide them full access. If we conceal anything, the consequences will be far worse." A hush fell. No one objected. They all felt the gravity of his words. Silas opened another folder. I want profiles on every employee with more than 2 informal complaints in the last year, not just the flight crews, ground staff, customer service agents. Anyone who interacts with our customers, we must leave no stone unturned. The head of HR scribbled notes. She sounded steady as she spoke. We will compile that list and begin interviews. We can deploy trained interviewers to gather qualitative data on these informal complaints. Silas nodded. Good. We will also redesign our complaint process so that every complaint, no matter how minor, is treated with seriousness. We will introduce an anonymous reporting portal for employees to share incidents they witnessed. Murmurs of agreement passed around the table. This was a departure from their usual stance. They had hesitated before on minor incidents. Silas's strategy demanded thoroughness and transparency. He leaned back slightly and folded his hands. Finally, we will establish a new oversight board for the airline. It will include independent members with no ties to Aureus Air. Their sole purpose will be to monitor compliance, review incidents, and make binding recommendations. Heads turned as they absorbed the scope. They realized this was a structural shift, a reinvention. Silas felt the heat in his arm, a dull ache reminding him of how it had started. A simple tray tilt, a moment of cruelty. Yet that moment had revealed so much. He locked eyes with each person in the room. This is our chance to redefine what it means to fly with us, to earn back trust, one passenger at a time. Are we ready to commit? The chief financial officer cleared her throat first. We will support the process. We will allocate the resources. The PR lead added, I will align messaging across all channels. We will commit to weekly updates. The operations manager said, I will reorganize crew assignments to remove any question of bias or retaliation. One by one, they voiced readiness. Silas felt a surge of cautious anticipation. This was a turning point. He rose from his chair and walked to the window. Below, the city sparkled in midday sun. He placed a hand on the glass. Our work begins now, he said softly. Not tomorrow, not after memo approvals, now. He turned back to the table. I will personally oversee this process. I will not abdicate responsibility. If you have questions, you come to me. If you encounter resistance, you bring it to me. I will not allow old habits to hide in corners. Silas returned to his seat and closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself. When he opened them, the room was silent but resolute. The senior compliance officer spoke last. We're with you. Silas nodded. Then let us begin. Silas Mercer watched the live feed from the external auditors on his tablet as they pored over flight logs and complaint records. The data streamed in real-time crew assignments, passenger contacts, incident reports, and performance reviews. Beneath the polished surface of Aureus Air lay a tangle of shortcuts, omissions, and outright cover-ups that spanned years. It began with cabin crew scheduling. 5 names repeated across dozens of flights with patterns eerily similar to Silas's own experience, preferential treatment for certain passengers and deliberate neglect of others. Pilots reported routine turbulence whenever complaints rose. Ground staff logbooks omitted entire rows of service delays. The collapse of trust was systemic. It seeped into every layer. Middle management meetings centered on maintaining brand prestige, which translated into ignoring complaints that might tarnish the company's shiny image. Emails circulated instructing supervisors to file any minor incident under operational variance. Allegations of racial bias were labeled sensitivity issues. Every euphemism served the same purpose: buried discomfort. Silas sat back, absorbing the scope. He had expected problems. He had not anticipated this scale. He tapped his watch once. Mara and Nico were already in the field, triangulating patterns with passenger device logs. Word had spread quietly any device capturing video or audio of misconduct flagged for secure upload. In minutes, dozens of clips appeared, snippets of crew conversations in the galley, overheard by unsuspecting passengers, flight attendants mocking cabin guests, supervisors joking about keeping the riffraff in check. A single comment cut through the noise. They'll believe the in-flight magazine before they believe you. A wave of nausea rose in Silas's chest because he recognized that line. It was the same attitude he'd observed when the young boy was burned mid-flight last year. The same excuse used to dismiss every complaint lodged by marginalized travelers. He tapped record on his tablet, saving the live feed. This wasn't just an internal audit anymore. It was a reckoning. He rose and turned to Jonah Lind, who sat nearby with a legal pad. This goes beyond individual breaches. We're looking at a culture that actively suppresses accountability. Jonah nodded. He tapped out an urgent message to the board. Silas addressed the room. We need immediate intervention. All current senior managers in operations, customer relations, and ground services, anyone with ties to these patterns are to be suspended pending review. We cannot afford doubt about impartiality. Gasps filled the table. Some faces paled. Others set their jaws. No one spoke. The suspension would affect dozens. It would disrupt schedules, delay flights, impact revenue. Silas met each pair of eyes. I know the cost. I accept it. A senior operations executive cleared her throat. Sir, some of these people have decades of service. They've never been formally accused. Should we not proceed with caution? Silas shook his head. Caution is what got us here. Silence is what allowed it. We need decisive action. The PR director looked up. This will be news. A major flight disruption and mass suspension. We need a narrative. Silas's gaze hardened. The narrative is accountability. We will brief the media ourselves. We will not let rumors fill the void. He pressed a button on his tablet. In the back of the room, a fly-through map of Aureus Air's global network appeared on the screen. Red dots blinked at every suspended manager's home base. The visual was stark. It spelled collapse. Mara spoke quietly. We've also uncovered internal memos directing staff to destroy complaint logs after 90 days. They were trained to see passenger dissatisfaction as a liability, not a warning. Silas felt a chill. Ship logs and maintenance checks are retained for 5 years under law, he said. But verbal complaints routinely vanished. That's fraud, obstruction of justice. A legal counsel adjusted his glasses. We could be looking at criminal liability, fines, license suspensions, even charges under aviation safety regulations. Silas nodded. Which is why we need to own this. Preemptive self-reporting to authorities, full cooperation with any federal inquiry. He paused as the door opened. Jules Rayner stepped in, eyes wide. He carried a file folder under his arm. Sir, he said, I have something. I found these in the lost and found, a DVR card from a hidden camera. Silas raised an eyebrow. Show me. Jules placed the folder on the table and slid out the card. Silas took it and inserted it into a reader. A sequence of dated footage loaded months of off-camera recordings from a flight attendant workstation. The camera had captured private conversations among supervisors' jokes about nubbing passengers, instructions to fudge seating records, and references to complaints dying quietly. The footage was damning. It was the smoking gun. Silas exhaled. Good work. A murmur ran around the table. The implications were clear. Aureus Air's suppression of complaints was not incidental. It was orchestrated. Silas closed his eyes for a moment. The burn on his arm throbbed. He had paid a price to uncover this. Now he had to decide how far he would go. He opened his eyes and faced the group. We will compile all this into a public dossier. It will accompany our self-report to the Department of Transportation and the FEA. We will present it to our board, our regulators, and our customers. Total transparency. The compliance officer's hand shot up. Sir, this is unprecedented. I'm worried about the fallout. Silas nodded gravely. I am too, but a half measure would be worse. We will rebuild from ashes, not sweep them under the rug. A quiet tension filled the room. The decision was irreversible. The airline was collapsing under the weight of its own secrets. But in that collapse lay the opportunity for genuine change. Silas reached into his briefcase and retrieved a small plaque, an embossed nameplate reading Sarif Air in silver. He placed it on the table. This, he said, is our future. If you stand with me, we transform. If not, we let this collapse define us. The choice is ours. A silence followed a charged hush. Then the chief financial officer exhaled and nodded. One by one, the team voiced agreement. They would face the collapse head-on and guide the rebirth. Silas pocketed the plaque and spoke softly. Yet each word carried weight. Let the collapse purify us, not destroy us. Let our actions prove we are better than our failures. Outside the window, employees scrolled through news alerts on their phones. Headlines had already begun shifting from shock to cautious optimism. Some proclaimed Aureus Air in crisis, others new era of transparency. In that moment, Silas felt hope. A phoenix could rise only after the fall. He tapped his smartwatch. The code name Project Horizon flashed on Mara's and Nico's screens. The collapse was underway, and so was the transformation. Silas Mercer stood at the head of the gleaming boardroom table as the first light of dawn filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows. The city below was waking up, unaware that a new chapter in aviation was about to begin. Today, Horizon Equity Partners would formally dissolve Aureus Air's corporate charter and activate Sarif Air. The room was filled with the same leadership team that had overseen the collapse. Each of them looked different now. Tension lines had softened into determination. There was a shared sense of purpose that had not existed before. They had culled the ranks of complacency and created space for something fundamentally new. Silas looked around and spoke with calm conviction. Today, we build more than an airline. We build trust. Jonah Lind, chief counsel, tapped at his tablet. The legal framework is finalized. We have filed the necessary articles of dissolution for Aureus Air. The entity, Sarif Air, is ready to receive all assets and liabilities in transition. Silas nodded. Good. Operations. The operations director, a quietly fierce woman named Elena Ruiz, rose to her feet. We have drafted new crew manuals. Service protocols now include explicit training on respect, cultural sensitivity, and passenger advocacy. Incident reporting is mandatory and cannot be bypassed. We have also established a helpline monitored by compliance. Silas allowed himself a small smile. That is exactly the kind of foundation we need. Elena continued. We have also revamped scheduling algorithms to ensure crew diversity and prevent insular assignment patterns. No one person or group can dominate a flight roster. We will monitor and adjust weekly. The finance chief leaned forward. We have reserved capital for a 3-month runway. Marketing budgets are allocated for a robust launch campaign. We anticipate initial losses, but we project break-even within 18 months given customer retention from transparency initiatives. Silas felt his heart steady. Strategy and financial viability were in alignment. It was rare. Next, the HR lead, Kamal Price, spoke. We have restructured hiring processes. All new hires participate in an ethics and empathy workshop facilitated by third-party experts. Existing employees completed a voluntary pledge ceremony last week. Those who opted out were counseled and offered transitional support. Silas listened as the plan unfolded. He pictured Sarif Air cabin crew guiding passengers with genuine care rather than scripted politeness. He imagined mechanics and ground staff who felt empowered to speak up without fear. Outside, the first official Sarif Air livery had been painted on a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. White fuselage trimmed in soft gold with a stylized wing motif representing vigilance. A subtle seraphic halo marked the tail. It was modern and understated. It conveyed guardianship, not opulence. Silas tapped his smartwatch twice. Mara Elgin appeared in the doorway with a quiet nod. The final piece was ready. He addressed the team. We have one more critical step before public launch. A commemorative ceremony marking the transition. I want our first flight under Sarif Air to carry a plaque, an empty seat honoring accountability. The inscription reads, "For those who dared to speak," a reminder that our culture is built on courage. The room fell silent as the weight of that sank in. They spoke of aircraft, stakeholders, and regulations every day. This was about something deeper. Silas continued. After our press release and inaugural flight announcement, we will host an event at Wexley International. I want passengers and staff invited to witness the unveiling. We will explain why the seat stands empty and invite them to fill it with their voices if ever wronged. Jonah stood. From a legal standpoint, we must ensure liability coverage. Attendees will sign waivers acknowledging the symbolic nature, but we can make the act a genuine invitation for feedback. Silas nodded. Yes, we open ourselves completely. The marketing director, Priya Menon, smiled. We can integrate video walls and terminals showing testimonials from passengers and staff about what accountability means to them. Social media can share these stories in real time. It will humanize the brand instantly. Silas turned to Kamal. How do our employees feel about this? Kamal looked down at his notes. Our post-transition survey shows 82% feel cautiously optimistic. A handful remain skeptical, but all appreciate the transparency. Our exit counseling for those leaving Aureus has been respectful and dignified. Silas nodded. We cannot let skepticism fester. We will host town halls. He paused and let the team absorb the magnitude. Auditors and regulators would be watching. Investors and partners would be evaluating. Most importantly, passengers would decide whether they believed in Sarif Air's promise. Silas rose from his chair and looked out at the city skyline as sunlight glinted off distant skyscrapers. This is more than a rebrand. It is a recommitment to the values we lost sight of. He turned back to the table. We have rebuilt the skeleton. It is time to infuse it with spirit. Mara stepped forward. All customer-facing staff have completed the empathy workshop. I've gathered preliminary feedback on training modules. Participants report a 90% increase in confidence to handle conflicts respectfully. Nico Tremaine added, "Our data dashboards are live. We will track every complaint, every weather-related delay, every service disruption. We will make our performance transparent." Silas allowed a slow, steady breath to fill him. This was the rebirth. He clapped his hands lightly. "Thank you all. We launch Sarif Air in 7 days. We will board Flight 100 on that day. I invite each of you to join that inaugural flight, live or in spirit, from any position on the plane. We will fly with unity, purpose, and openness." The team exchanged hopeful glances. For weeks they had worked in crisis mode. Now they moved into celebration mode, an unfamiliar but necessary transition. Silas gathered his briefcase. Let us show the world that an airline can be judged by how it treats its most vulnerable and how it honors accountability. If we succeed, we will prove that compassion is good business. He turned toward the exit. As he left the room, Jonah offered a final word: "Prepare to make history." Silas paused in the doorway. He looked back at the assembled team, each face reflecting a shared determination. "We already are." Outside the suite, Mara and Nico fell in beside him. Mara said, "Everything is set for the launch event. We've invited passengers from Flight 327 to join us." Silas offered her a grateful nod. "Thank you," Nico added. "Media packets are ready. We have prepared interviews with select passengers and staff. They'll speak to the journey." Silas breathed in the morning air cooling the hallway. He felt the burn in his arm once more. It reminded him of the moment everything changed. It reminded him of why they were rebuilding. He lifted his gaze, looking down the corridor at posters announcing Sarif Air's promise: trust at altitude, hope in every flight. He tapped his watch twice. Project Horizon code flashed on their devices. The rebuild was live. They stepped into the bright hallway together, ready to guide Sarif Air into the sky. Silas Mercer entered his office on the morning after Sarif Air's launch celebration. Toward the horizon, the sun cast long rays across the skyline as the city stirred to life. He felt the familiar ache in his arm as he removed the light bandage. The burn had healed into a scar, but it still pulsed softly, a reminder of how a single moment can spark revolution. He settled at his desk and activated his secure feed. Project Horizon dashboards glowed with performance metrics. Customer satisfaction soared. Incident reports trended downward. Crew compliance rates held steady above 95%. All signs of success. Yet he knew that in any transformation there lurks the threat of relapse. His email pinged. A single message flagged urgent, no subject line. He hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a link to a fringe news blog. The headline read, "Black Auditing, CEO Stages Attack on Airline for Personal Grudge." The article claimed Silas had engineered the burn to justify a hostile takeover of Aureus Air. It included manipulated quotes attributed to him and out-of-context clips of earlier meetings. It was a classic character assassination. Silas pressed back from the desktop. Rage flared, but he forced himself to breathe. He had seen this tactic before. Blame the messenger to distract from the message. He tapped his watch twice. Mara Elgin joined via secure video. Her face was calm, but her eyes were sharp. She nodded once. "We found the source," she said. "An anonymous post out of a hacktivist collective. But the real leak originated here." Silas frowned. You traced it to Horizon's network. Mara pulled up her screen. Yes. Our firewall logs show data exfiltration at 2:13 a.m. last night. The IP mapped back to a terminal in the compliance wing. We identified a user account that accessed boardroom recordings. Silas closed his eyes. He trusted his team implicitly, but he had promised transparency. He could not let a single betrayal unravel everything. He tapped his watch again. Nico Tremaine appeared on a second feed. I isolated the user. Nico said, "It's Damien Tall. He was part of the original audit team. He had access to raw footage and internal strategy docs." Silas inhaled. Damien had been there when they discovered Ronan's pattern. He had even joined them for strategy sessions. He had seemed committed. Now the question was why. "Show me his activity," Silas said softly. Nico cued a timeline. Damien had copied 5 files over a secure drive. Flight logs, internal memos on brand strategy, confidential compliance meeting recordings, all time-stamped during after hours, Mara added. We also recovered a chat transcript with a private number. Damien was promised placement at a competitor if he leaked our data. He believed it would derail Sarif's launch. Silas stared at his scarred arm. He had paid a price in pain and courage. Now someone had tried to ignite doubt and division. He tapped back into the meeting room feed and addressed his team. "Keep this contained. No public statement until we speak with Damien." He looked at Mara. "Arrange a secure interview room." Within the hour, Damien arrived escorted by security. He looked different from the eager analyst Silas first met. His shoulders slumped. His expression was a mixture of defiance and shame. Silas rose from behind his desk and extended a hand. Damien hesitated before offering a limp shake. No words were spoken. Silas motioned toward a chair. Damien sat. Silas closed the distance and placed a folder in front of him. "We watched you," he said gently. "We know what you did." Damien swallowed. I thought Sarif Air would fail. I thought your audit would ruin hundreds of jobs and billions in investment. The old Aureus executives promised me a senior post if I helped them smear your name. I thought it was harmless." Silas listened without interruption. He nodded slowly. "Let me show you what's actually happening." He tapped his tablet and played a short montage. Clips of Horizon auditors volunteering at the airport, Sarif crew distributing tablets with apology messages, passengers on Flight 100 marveling at the empty seat, testimonials from staff who felt heard for the first time. Damien watched with tears brimming. "I did not see that side." Silas closed the tablet. "Your action threatened to tarnish months of honest work, but I believe you can help repair it." Damien's lips trembled. I am sorry. I will do anything to fix this." Silas studied him for a long moment. "I will not press charges," he said at last. "Instead, you will lead an internal task force on ethical data management. You will train staff on the importance of secure channels and loyalty to honest purpose. You will account for every record you accessed, and you will speak to regulators on our behalf." Damien exhaled in relief and horror. "I accept." Silas nodded. He stood and offered a firm handshake. "Thank you for your courage in coming forward." Damien rose, grasped Silas's hand, and in that moment Silas saw a flicker of hope. One more person realigning with the mission. After Damien left, Silas convened his leadership team. "One final flame tried to burn us down," he said, "but we have turned it into light." He tapped his watch. Mara and Nico marked the leak contained. He addressed the group. We will release an internal memo acknowledging the breach. We will thank Damien for his cooperation and reaffirm our unwavering commitment to transparency." The PR director asked, "Should we offer a public note?" Silas smiled. "Yes. A brief statement. Admit the breach. Describe the remedy. Emphasize our new data safeguards. Then we move on. People respect honesty." As the team mobilized, Silas looked out at the city below. The scar on his arm tingled softly. It reminded him how a single act of cruelty can spark an avalanche. Equally, a single act of integrity can start a blaze of reform. He tapped his tablet. The headline for tomorrow's press release appeared, "Sarif Air addresses data breach with full transparency and renewed commitment to accountability." He closed the screen. Sarif Air was more than a name. It was a promise. A promise that even the final flame of betrayal could illuminate a brighter path forward. Silas Mercer rose and walked to his window. The morning sun warmed his face. He felt a pulse of possibility once more. A final flame had burned, but from its embers rose something stronger. A culture built not on silence or secrets, but on truth set free. And in that truth he found hope. Silas Mercer walked briskly through Terminal C of Wexley International Airport. The memory of the first time he'd been wheeled through the concourse flashing in his mind. Then his arm had throbbed, his dignity intact, but his mission just beginning. Now the space felt transformed. The empty seat remained, but it bore new meaning. The brass plaque beside Gate C-12 gleamed under the overhead lights. It read, "In honor of accountability." Below, smaller text invited passengers to share stories of respect and to speak out against neglect. Volunteers from Sarif Air's ethics team stood nearby, ready to record testimonies. Silas paused before the seat, its leather pristine, a folded Sarif Air blanket resting on the cushion. He reached out and ran his fingers lightly along the armrest. The burn scar on his forearm pulsed softly as if in solidarity. He remembered the day it happened, a precise tilt of a steaming tray, an unspoken message of who belonged and who did not. A young, uniformed attendant approached. His name tag read Tyrell James. He held a clipboard, his hands shaking slightly. Silas offered a warm nod. "Good morning, Mr. Mercer," Tyrell said, voice timid but hopeful. I know who you are. I came here because of what you did." Silas smiled gently. "Thank you. Tyrell, what's your story?" Tyrell exhaled and glanced at the plaque. "My father was a mechanic with Aureus Air. He loved his job, but he left after Flight 327. He said he could no longer ignore how passengers were treated. He told me I should join Sarif Air because we stand for more than profits." Silas felt a lump in his throat. "I'm sorry he had to leave under those conditions." Tyrell nodded. "He's proud I'm here. I want to make things better." He held out the clipboard. "May I record your thoughts?" Silas considered the invitation. He could speak or remain silent as the plaque suggested. He cleared his throat. "Accountability isn't a one-time act. It's a promise we renew with every flight. It demands courage from those who speak and humility from those who listen." Tyrell scribbled quickly. His pen paused. Anything else? Silas looked at the empty seat. That seat belongs to every person who ever felt invisible. He closed his eyes for a moment. May it remind us that respect starts with acknowledgement. Tyrell nodded, hands trembling as he signed off. He offered the clipboard back. "Thank you." Silas patted his shoulder. "Thank you, Tyrell." Tyrell retreated to make his next recording. Silas continued down the concourse, watching passengers glance at the plaque and then at the seat. Some snapped photos. Some replayed news footage on their phones. Others simply paused in silent reflection. At a nearby kiosk, passengers could log comments. Silas approached and read excerpts. "I flew first class for the first time and appreciated the respect. Thank you for listening. My mother was denied water. Today I feel heard." Each entry carried weight, a mosaic of shared experiences. Silas tapped his watch twice. Mara Elgin appeared on his device. She stood in the Horizon Equity offices, reviewing daily metrics. "Morning. We've collected over 1,000 stories since launch," she reported. "Engagement is off the charts." Silas exhaled. "That's the proof." He tapped again. Nico Tremaine joined. "Security logs show 0 incidents of neglect in the last week," Nico said with satisfaction. "Crew compliance is at 98%. Silas allowed himself a rare moment of pride. The data aligned with the human stories. Reality matched the promise. He boarded the Sarif Air shuttle for his evening flight. Gate attendants greeted him by name. He smiled and returned the gesture. The crew brief looked crisp respect protocols, reporting channels, 0 tolerance for silence. As he walked down the jet bridge, he passed that same empty seat now permanently reserved, never sold. He ran his fingers along the polished plaque. The seat would carry its message long after he was gone. Silas took his place in seat 2A. The cabin lights dim for departure. He leaned back, closing his eyes. He could feel the steady hum through the floor, a reminder that flight demands trust. Moments later, a young woman in row 1C caught his eye. She smiled and gave a subtle thumbs up. He nodded in return. Small acts of solidarity were building a new culture. As the plane climbed above the clouds, Silas gazed at the seatbelt sign fading in the overhead panel. Below, the city's lights had begun to flicker on. Above, the first stars emerged. He traced the scar on his arm with his fingertips. It tingled softly, a reminder of his journey from a silent audit to a movement. He inhaled through his nose and whispered to himself, "We have flown beyond fear." He gazed at the empty seat across the aisle, reserved, honored, impossible to ignore. He closed his eyes and exhaled. Today, Sarif Air was not just an airline. It was a promise carried on every flight, a testament that accountability and compassion, once sparked, could sustain even the highest journey. As we close this chapter of Silas Mercer's journey, remember that true change begins when we refuse to look away. His quiet courage transformed a luxury airline, proving that accountability and empathy can conquer even the deepest prejudice. Let this story remind us every small act of respect matters. Together, we can stand with those who dare to speak and build a world where no one is burned by silence. If Silas's fight moved you, give this video a thumbs up, share it with friends, and subscribe to our channel. Stay tuned for our next episode where we uncover more truths, celebrate quiet heroes, and inspire the courage to demand justice in every corner of life.